So, Tisha B'Av is over, and yeah, and you know, it's important for a Jew to tune into the cycles of our life, because our life is cyclic, and it's spiritually cyclic. So the period from Tu B'Av, from now until the beginning of the next year, is a time that one needs to view as a whole piece. In other words, we've got the remainder of Av, then we go to Elul, where we'll learn all the inyonim of, I don't know, I've got something wrong with my throat, excuse me. We'll spend some time in Elul understanding the preparations of tshuva and what the energy of tshuva is, how it's a creative energy and what it can do. And then, of course, we come to the month of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. And this whole period is a unity. And it's interesting how there's Hashgacha Pratis in everything in Torah, of course. It's God's wisdom, it's planned by God infinitely wisely. So I thought we'd do a couple of famous sikhs from the Rebbe on Shema. Why? Because last week's Seder, which we didn't learn together because of Tisha B'Av, it was Ve'es Hanan, in which the first of the three chapters of the Shema is set out. And then this week is Parshat EIKEV, in which the second of the three chapters is set out. And it's important that when we emerge from the month of into the month of Elul and then the month of Tishrei, that we really understand the unity of the Shema insofar as it applies to us personally. And you know, just as an aside, there's a fascinating exchange in the Gemara between 5 of the Tanuim, 5 of the original articulators of the Gemara, as to which is the most, I may have mentioned this before in the shir, which is the most important posuk in the whole Torah. One of the Tanuim said it was Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'etz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. One said it was Shema. One said that there are 5 different suggestions. Ben Poisey says it's that you bring a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the evening as a korban. And it's interesting that when the Chachamim rule on which of those psukim is the most important, one of them was, for example, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, that you love your. So they're all massively important, and then comes this last one that you bring a lamb in the morning and you bring a lamb in the afternoon as a korban, which is korban tomid. So that's brought every day, Yom Kippur, every day, whatever it is. And Ben Posey, who suggested that, is voted the one who is correct. Why? Because the commentators all explain that for a Jew, one of the very important things to establish as he gets centered in his spiritual life and learns who he is and what it is that he's supposed to be living for, is that you need to be totally constant. Constancy is an enormous tool and an enormous product of your way of life. And it's interesting that's the posuk that wins the argument. Now, Shema is something that we say, as everybody knows, twice a day, and other times. The old joke is that every Jew says, no matter how irreligious, says Shema when the plane's going down. There are lots of, but fundamentally we have an obligation to say it twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And it's the two pieces of Shema straddle these 2 weeks. Last week when we didn't have a shiur, tonight when we are having a shiur. So there is a hashgacha protest in learning it now, and there's also the Rebbe used to teach Shema often after Tisha B'Av and in the run-up to Rosh Hashanah and the month of Tishrei. I don't know my voices. So let's do it. Everybody, I'm sure, knows the Shema. I don't have to read it, but there are some things that we need to get on board before we start. The Shema says, as you know, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is our God, and He's one. And then after Baruch Shem Kavod, it says, Ve'ahavta Eis Adonai Elokecha, that you will love your God, B'chol levavcha, with all your heart, U'v'chol nafshecha, and with all your soul, U'v'chol me'odecha, and with all your might. Might is a I don't know how me'odecha translates. Might isn't a good translation, but it means, it really connotes without limit, absolutely without any. So with your heart, we understand. With your soul, we kind of understand. With your might, meaning without any reservation, no limit. There's no limit to it whatsoever. And the commentators all start with a very logical question, which if you spend 3 seconds thinking about it, you have to ask yourself, how can Hashem take such a central posuk to our lives as Jews, and how can we be commanded to love God? How can you be commanded for an emotion? You can be commanded for your behavior, right? You can be commanded to be obedient, to serve Hashem in a certain way. But how can you say, I demand that you love so and so? How can you do that? How is that going to work? If there have been plenty of women in history and corresponding men in history who've demanded love from somebody they wanted. It's not there. How can you command it? So the commentators all say, well, this has to have a meaning, and the meaning is that ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, if you b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha, that then if you do certain things, if you have certain perspectives, it will bring you to love. For example, let's go back to the mantra that we learn in Chassidus over and over again. You recognize that God created the world, that is an ongoing business, the way that Tanya explains. So He's recreating the world every moment. So if He's doing that, hashgacha protest, divine providence, applies to everything. Everybody you meet, everything you do, everything that comes in your way, That's all Hashgacha Pratis. You have free choice only in how you react to what happens to you. So and then you begin to realize that your life is a shlichus. Your life is you've got a job to do in your life. Sure, you can live your life ignoring it, but then you're not living, you're existing. Or you can learn Chabad Hasidus and learn that your life has meaning and purpose and fulfillment, and you go to work to achieve that. In doing that, Hasidus guarantees you that brings you to loving your God. So that's how most commentators approach this first problem of how can you command an emotion. But then there's another big logical problem before we get going, and that is that it says, "Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha." Now, levavcha, it should say levcha, right? Lamed, Vez, Chof, meaning your heart. So why has it got two bases, two vovs? So the standard answer is no problem. You have to love God with your Yetzer Hara as well as your Yetzer Tov. So let's get the terms straight. Every creature in creation has a nefesh. A nefesh we translate as a life force. Jews have an extra level to that life force called a neshama. The neshama is made up of 5 levels in itself. It's not the time to go into it at the moment, but these 2 parts to a Jewish soul are made up of a nefesh elokis, a godly soul, and a nefesh abamis, an animal soul. The nefesh elokis yearns for God and Torah and performing mitzvahs. The nefesh abamis has nothing to do with that. It has to do with keeping you alive. It has to do with recognizing that you need to eat, that you need to sleep, that you need to drink, you need to procreate, you need to accumulate, to gratify yourself. So in case you run out of food tomorrow, you need to be storing the nuts somewhere. So you're storing the nuts somewhere. It's not hard to understand. The bigger the bank account, the better. All of a sudden you're providing for yourself and your family in your mind, which of course you're not, but we haven't got time to go there at the moment. But so the nefesh abamis there's nothing wrong with it. It is functioning in terms of keeping you alive in the best way possible, naturally. Now, the nefesh abamis spawns a lust for the things that keep you alive. And that's called the Yetzer Hara. And the nefesh elokis spawns a lust for godliness and everything godly. And that's called the Yetzer Tov. So when the Shema uses the word levavcha with 2 vovs, the commentators say, well, the reason there are 2 vovs is because you've got 2 parts to your heart. You've got your Yetzer Hara and you've got your Yetzer Tov. You've got the bad inclination and the good inclination. And it's important, explains the learning on the Shema, that you and I recognize that our job is not only to serve Hashem with our nefesh elokis. That's easy. Nefesh elokis wants to serve God. What's the hard part? Serving God with your nefesh abamis. So the reason that the Shema is so careful in using the word levavcha with 2 vovs is to remind us that we have to serve God with both aspects of our desires, our good desires and our negative desires. Okay, so let's define a Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara is those feelings that we all have which are selfish, for example, which are grasping from other people, which are self-servicing, which are self-satisfying, all normal. But step one in spiritual progress is to recognize that normal or not, that's like saying that it's normal for a child to chuck a tantrum and roll on the ground and scream and kick and so on. And part of becoming a mature adult is to be educated that you can't do that because it takes space from everybody else in the room and whatever it is. So a mature person, especially a spiritually mature person who has some insights into what makes him angry and why he's getting angry and whether he should be getting angry, for that person, he's not going to be chucking a tantrum. Why? Because he's educated to a point where he understands that even though he has these primitive needs, he controls them. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know. So we learn that the Nefesh Abamis and its Yetzer Hara is perfectly natural, but if you then, like many people in fashionable society today, especially amongst the woke and all the rest of it, they say that if it's natural, therefore it's justified. Now, we don't learn like that. We don't learn that just because it's natural, it's justified. It may be natural to walk down the street and see somebody wearing clothing you don't like and slap him in the face. Natural or not, if that's your nature, so the answer to that is, so what? You don't do it. Why don't you do it? Because you control it. So one of the things that good Jewish Chinuch education does is to take a child and teach him right from wrong. What's right, meaning that which is consistent with Ratzon Hashem. What's wrong is that which is not consistent with Ratzon Hashem. You tell me you have a natural lust for something. Our answer to that as Jews is, so what? So what? You have a natural lust for it. Hashem's given you certain koikas hanefesh, certain things about you which you're born with. And the fact that you're born with it, that isn't the whole story. That's the beginning of the story. And the beginning of the story is to recognize that your life is a personal adventure, in which the goal is to modify negative behavior and negative desires, and to justify them because they feel natural or they feel good or they feel certain. It was bigger than both of us. We couldn't help it. We don't believe that. You can help it. What could we do? We fell in love. We do not hold that to be an answer. You're married. She's married. One of the 10 commandments are you don't commit adultery. If you don't commit adultery, it is not an answer to say, yes, but I wanted to. Of course you wanted to. Who doesn't? But our life is a life of modifying the Yetzer Hara. It's normal, but it's spiritually ugly. Our job is to learn not to work for ourselves, but to work for everybody around us, our wife, our children, our community, and to be somebody who believes in contributing to society and building a better world. That is the goal of a Jew. That's the mission we got on Har Sinai, to introduce godliness into physicality and elevate physicality into ruchnius. So what do you do with this? So it's explained, there are 3 steps to understanding this. 2 of them are in Nigla and 1 of them is in Chassidus. The 2 in Nigla, let's do first of all. How do you elevate the Yetzer Hara? Because the Yetzer Tov doesn't need elevating. Let's remember, it's the natural desire to run after godliness and emulate what you learn in Torah and do the mitzvahs the best you can. So the Yetzer Tov doesn't need any work. It's the Yetzer Hara that needs the work. So how do you work with it? So it's explained, there are 2 steps in Nigla, in revealed Torah. First step is you elevate it by saying no. You say no. So what if I want it? I'm on a plane, I've ordered kosher food, they don't bring the kosher food, they left it in Sydney, it's a 15-hour flight, and the guy sitting next to you's got this meat pie or whatever it is your poison is, and it's warm and hot and decent, and you are hungry, and you look around the plane, not another Jew in sight. Nobody's going to see you. So one thing that your Yetzer Hara is telling you, you're hungry, it's natural, you've got to eat. It's not your fault that there's no kosher food on the board. So if it's not your fault, what can you do? You've got to look after your health. You can't starve. So if you can't starve, you've got to, so you can eat. Now, that's not going to elevate your Yetzer Hara. But saying no to it is going to elevate your Yetzer Hara. So the first way you deal with negative desire, we learn as a matter of Nigla, as a matter of revealed Torah, is just to say no to it. You tell me sometimes it's difficult. The answer to that is, so what? Some of the best things in life are difficult. Then there's a second way. Let's take an example of something that you like, the Yetzer Hara, like eating. We're eating. You like to eat. And you like to eat to excess. And you like to eat good food, well tricked up food, nicely, if you like sweet chocolate, if you like whatever it is. So we are told that another way of dealing with the lust for food, because when the lust for food gets beyond sustaining yourself to be healthy, it's not a positive thing. It's something from the Yetzer Hara. So how can you deal with that? How can you elevate that aspect of the Yetzer Hara? You keep that food for Shabbos, Yom Tov, where it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah on Shabbos and Yom Tov to gorge, and because you love the food. Right? The rest of the week you don't. But you convert that lust on Shabbos and Yom Tov to serve Hashem, doing the mitzvah of eating for pleasure, drinking for pleasure. I used to try and explain that to my wife when I had too much whiskey on Shabbos afternoon. Fell on deaf ears, I got it to you. But that's a way of not denying it, but converting it to serving a function which is elevating that desire. But then the Rebbe explains there's our perspective, the perspective that you learn from Chabad Chassidus. And for that, the Rebbe refers to the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, who quotes a Zohar. And the Zohar that he quotes gives this mashal, that a king wants his son to be morally, to be sexually, morally behaved well. He wants him to be a person who has a high sexual moral standing. So he teaches him, brings him up in a certain way, you do this, you don't do this, and then it's time to test him. So what does he do? He goes and hires a harlot. And the job of the harlot is to try and seduce the son. And the Alter Rebbe analyzes the fact that all people in this example want the same thing, really. They really want him not to sleep with the harlot. The king doesn't want him to sleep with the harlot. The prince doesn't want to sleep with the harlot because he wants to do what his father's taught him to do all his life. And the harlot doesn't want him to sleep with the harlot. Why? Because she's been hired for the job, but she loves the king and she wants what's good for the king. And what's good for the king is that the son doesn't sleep with her. So all three of them want the same thing from a different perspective. None of them want the negative outcome. So the Rebbe explains a very deep thing. He explains that you have to understand my personal guilt. Why would you feel guilty about something? It's a fascinating question. Why would a Jew ever feel guilty? It can't be his Yetzer Tov that's feeling guilty, right? Because Yetzer Tov's got nothing to feel guilty about. And it can't be, apparently, the Yetzer Hara to feel guilty. Why? Because the Yetzer Hara lives to be guilty. So where is the guilt coming from? Huh?
Jewish man. Good answer.
Good answer, that's right. So where does this guilt come from? So the Rebbe explains this. He explains that the Yetzer Hara doesn't want bad for bad's sake. Its job is to test you yourself. And its job is to provide a scenario where you can go wrong, but don't really want to. In a Jew's heart and soul, at the bottom of everything, underneath it all, he wants godliness. That's what he wants. He's got desires, so they're going to get in the way. So he's got to spend a lifetime learning how to control them, how to use them, like in the example of the food on Shabbos and Yom Tov. But at the end of the day, you need to understand, explains the Rebbe, that you and I have a perspective for good. And that's because our neshama is a helik Eloika mimal. That's because our neshama is a piece of godliness itself. So even though you think that you really have these negative issues, and you do, but they are actually have underlying them a real desire not to do them. And that's where the guilt comes from. And so how do we harness this by those three steps? The first step is to say no. The second step is to convert the issue into something good. But the third step is to understand that you're in partnership with your God in this life. And there's no such thing as a bad Jew. You've got to understand this. There's bad behavior. There are bad actions. But a Jewish neshama doesn't sin. A Jewish neshama is a helik Eloka mimal. You tell me your behavior goes wrong, fix it. You tell me it's hard, the answer is so what? It takes time. But one thing is for certain, you live a different life. If you're in control, instead of existing, you're living. You're flowering, you're growing, you're living. Now, all of that was in last week's section. this week's section repeats much of what was in the first section of the Shema. The second part of the Shema repeats a lot of what's in the first part. And you know that we have a problem with this because every word is the wisdom of Hashem. There are a certain number of finite letters in the Torah. It's to last forever. The Torah is nitzchis, it's eternal. It applies to every Jew in every generation. Hashem's not going to waste words by repeating stuff unnecessarily. So why would there be the same thing repeated from the first section of the Shema to the second section of the Shema? And the answer is, when you analyze this in Chassidus, and this will be technical for 3 minutes until you get on top of it, the order is reversed in a few areas, and until it occurs to you to plumb the depths of this, most people probably don't even notice. When you learn the Rebbe's Torah, you certainly notice, and then when you begin to understand, when the Rebbe gives you the key to understanding it, all of a sudden there's a gilui, there's a revelation. So let's just do a few of the differences. In the first section, it's with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. You may be surprised tomorrow when you say, well, tonight when you say Shema and you read the second section, it doesn't say with all your might. It says with all your heart and all your soul. So chalk that up as question number one. Number two, the first section of the Shema talks about learning Torah and then doing mitzvahs. The second part of the Shema reverses the order. You're putting on the tefillin first, and then you learn Torah with your children. We'll come to that in a minute. So that's the second question. Why is that? Why is the order reversed? Third question. In the first part of the Shema, there's no question about punishment. In the second part of the Shema, if you don't do what you did, you're not going to get your rain in the season, etc., etc. So there's a concept of punishment. We don't learn punishment the way the Gentiles learn punishment. It's not beating you up, it's for your benefit. We've done this before, we'll do it again. It's not part of it. We don't have time for it in this year. But punishment is a constructive thing from God's love, but it's only mentioned in the second section, not the first. And then the fourth difference is that grammatically, Hebrew, like French, like what my parents spoke at home, Polish, I'm sure in Russian, you have singular agreeing with singular, plural agreeing with plural, right? Yeah. So in the first part of the Shema, it's levavcha, and in the second part, it's levavchem. So the second part is plural, and the first part is singular. So these are obvious differences, and those differences, for fools, they'll hold that up and say, you see, this Torah was written by a rabble in the desert. They didn't remember what they wrote in the last Sedra, so in the last Sedra they wrote singular, and this Sedra they wrote plural, and if you want to learn like that, you haven't even started to learn Torah. So we know that these changes have very deep significance, and what is the genius of the Rebbe, or all the Rebbeim in Chabad, but particularly our Rebbe, who spoke differently in the Sikhs and in the Maimorim than the previous Rebbeim, almost as though you could hear two dynamics. Number one, he was talking to a generation who had been shoveled out of the gas chambers of Europe, who were depressed and beaten down and had feelings of inferiority and lack of accomplishment. And he spoke to them as though they were supermen. There's never any allowance whatsoever for any level of weakness or that was on the one hand. On the other hand, although he was talking to people who by and large didn't know any Torah to start with, he never compromised anything in what he said. The degree of difficulty was the same when he spoke to children, when he spoke to adults, when he spoke to women. True it is that in some sikhs it's really very, very difficult, and then nobody understood it. There are sikhs, when the Rebbe was explaining Ayin Bays and Renat, and for those that know what that is, nobody understood it. Yoel Khan maybe did. Maybe Y.Y. Jacobson, I don't know. Maybe the Hoisrim did. But most people didn't. But the Rebbe never compromised anything. He never compromised his view of another Jew as being a Helik or Lekam Mimal, and he never compromised the Torah that he taught. And nowhere, and the thrust for all of this was to grow you and me. So we used to go to the Rebbe for dollars. You'd stand in front of the Rebbe for microseconds. I mean, less than 30 seconds, for sometimes half a minute, maybe a minute. If you're very fortunate or very needy, maybe a minute and a half. But you grew from that experience. It's very difficult to explain in words because it's an experiential thing. But the Rebbe would, these blue eyes would bore into your neshama, and you felt this enormous warmth and enormous growth and enormous empowerment to go away and do some good. So, as usual, the Rebbe's keys to understanding these differences in the Shema are with that accent, that he's not telling you something to show you how clever he is in learning or what a genius he is, or it's for you and me to understand that this is how we have to live for ourselves, for our benefit. Not for the Yetzer Hara's benefit, but for our benefit as a Jewish human being. And he explains the differences like this. We have to start with a perspective change. The first, although both sections of the Shema use the word Shema, which means hear, but really it means understand. So there are two ways that you can understand. The Rebbe explains that one way is seeing and one way is hearing. And they are two different levels of experience. Seeing is much, much more certain. If you see a red Ferrari smash into a milk truck and you have to go to court and you're being cross-examined on which car smashed into the milk truck, you will have no trouble remembering that it was a red something because you saw it. Right? On the other hand, if we all went away and I asked you to repeat Kremnizer's shir tonight, everybody would come up with something, but you could hardly say that everybody would say the same thing word for word, correct? Who's going to say it word for word? Who's going to listen to it word? and who's going to repeat it word for word. So everybody will add their own interpretation. Let's take music. You listen to a piece of music, and that music, everybody knows, can affect you emotionally, not only mentally, not only psychologically, not only mentally with your brain. You can feel. Some music evokes feeling, right? Why? Because when you see something, you don't add anything to it. There's no participation in that by you and me other than to experience it. You see it. That's all there is to it. When you hear something, like you hear the shir, right? We're both working. I'm working to give you the shir, and you're working to understand it. So you are taking each word as it comes out, and you're adding that to what you heard before, and you're introducing your brain and your analysis and your reception of it. And we are partners in what you're hearing. We are not partners when the red Ferrari driving into the milk truck. No one's a partner with you. You just saw it. It's more certain, but it doesn't require the same level of involvement from you and me as hearing does. Right? Says the Rebbe, you have to understand that this is our partnership with our God. This is why the Shema is different in the two aspects. I'll explain why in a minute. I'll explain what the Rebbe explains why. But you need to understand that there are two fundamental energies propelling our lives. One is a Giloi Elokus to us, a revelation from above to below to us. You don't do anything to deserve it. It's there. You register it. Okay, you've registered it, but you go outside and you see that it's blue sky, daylight, and you see the daylight. There's no participation from you and me. You see the daylight. Do we need to see the daylight? Absolutely. Should we be grateful for the daylight? That's why we say the morning brachas every day. You say the brachas that you can see and that you can hear and that you're clothed and you're not naked and you can, stand up straight. That you can empty your bowels. You know what a bracha that is? So all of these things we are enjoined to notice because they're a big bracha. But that's all you do. You notice it. You say thank you for it. Thank you for the blue sky, right? But if you're going to listen to a speech from one of the two incumbent presidents of the United States, right? You're going to be a partner in that speech, whether you know it or not. Until tonight, you may not have known it, but you are, because you are sifting those words. You are adding to those words, you're taking away from those words, you're analyzing them, you're balancing them, you're judging them. You are a partner in that. Now that is from below to above. Incredible code is, because the Shema has these two levels, I'm going to come to that in a moment. Last week was Ve'es Hanan, which means I'm begging you, God. The word Ve'es Hanan translates best as I implore you, right? Yeah. I'm entreat you, I beg you, Hashem. That's what are you asking for? You're asking to see the daylight. Moshe Rabbeinu is asking to see Eretz Yisrael. That's what he's asking for. He wants to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael and see it. This week's Sedra is EIKEV. EIKEV is the heel. The heel is the lowest part of the body. It's the most, first of all, it's physically the lowest part, but secondly, the heel feels less than any other part of the body. So that is, and the first is an example from above to below, the seeing, and the second is an example, the EIKEV is you contributing your component to what is going on. Which is more important, Both are important. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim haim. These are the words of the living God. So the first part is we all want to know that there's blue sky, and we want to know when it's light and when it's dark. We want to know, but we've also got it. That's no good. Just to experience, just to soak up, just to want, just to gratify. That's just pure Yetzer Hara. And that's not where we are. Explains the Rebbe. Where we are is we are at a focal point of the meeting of a Gilui Elokus and your and my contribution to what. So there's what's happening to us. That's Hashgacha Pratis. And what you and I do about what's happening to us, that's our business. That's our free choice. And that's the dynamic of Jewish life. And without understanding that, a Jew, you live a different kind of life. Because suddenly, let me just make this very difficult, suddenly you realize that everything that's happening to you is of enormous value. It's of enormous value. This is the raw material with which you and I need to work through to have a successful life. And what's more important than that? So, let's go through the differences. In the first Shema, it says, Me'odecha, with all your might, with unlimited. Why is that unlimited? Because the first part of the Shema is about seeing. The second part of the Shema is about hearing. The first part of the Shema is unlimited. Why? Because when you see a Gilui Elokus, there's no limit. There's no limit to sky. There's no limit to darkness. Only if we work with that is there. So the second part of the Shema has a limit, and that's why, because that's our contribution. We are finite, so our contribution is going to be finite. Therefore, there's no word me'odecha. In the first part of the Shema, in last week's, the first part of the Shema, because it's sight, because it's a Gilui Elokus, because it's a revelation of godliness, we learn Torah first, and then as a result of that, we're so blown away by it that we do what Hashem wants us to do, tells us to do. In the second part of the Shema, it's the reverse. What's that?
Someone is trying to get inside.
Do you mind letting him in?
What do you think?
Huh?
You're the owner.
Yeah, let him in, sure. What is he collecting?
I wouldn't have a clue. Never seen him in my life.
Yeah, but he looks like
I'm going to
he
check
is.
his papers, though.
He looks like he is. So,
Shlicha from Israel.
yeah, probably found out there was a shear on tonight. Yeah, we do a mitzvah. You don't have to give him more than you can afford. So,
Heidi Pushkin.
but I want to finish this because it's really, really important. So, the second part of the Shema is mitzvahs first and then learning Torah. Why? Because the focus is on our contribution, our behavior, and the result is the Torah that we learn. Shalom Aleichem. Can you find a chair somewhere? Oh, you have. Okay. I think that's broken. Be careful. You understand English? Yeah, good. The similar, why is there no mention of punishment in the first section of the Shema? Because there's nothing to rectify. We're experiencing a Gilui Elokus, we're experiencing seeing, and therefore there's no negative, yeah, give him a l'chaim. There's no negative that comes from that. So there's no necessity for punishment, for raising a person. And finally, the first part is singular, the second part is plural. first part is singular. Why? Because you're having a personal experience. And the second part is plural. Why? Because it's our job to be a light to the nations. That's our job. And you can't do it by preaching because no one's going to want to listen. But you have to be a person that as the Frierdiker Rebbe says, that in Hayoim Yoim, he uses the word a chassid, but there goes a Jew. He walks like a Jew. He talks like a Jew. He does business like a Jew. He goes to sleep like a Jew. He gets up in the morning like a Jew. And then you're an example to other people, and other people can then deal with this whole issue of b'chol levavcha, of kol nafshecha. So, in short, last week was first part of the Shema. This week is second part of the Shema. Both parts of the Shema are great secrets of Torah. The first part is the concept of visualizing God's bounty. The second part is earning our growth in life. And at the end of the day, we need both, obviously, and the real fulfillment of a Jew's life comes from not only knowing that those two things exist, but making that part of one's das, making that part of one's consciousness, so that it makes a difference to your perspective. So that when something happens to you and me, we have to know that it's either the first part of the Shema, it's something visual, which we can be certain of, or it's part of the second part of the Shema, and often both, which requires our participation. We are hearing. Shema is understanding. We're hearing, we're contributing. We are contributing with our brain and our emotions, and together, those two things make up our life, which is to bring Ruchnius into Gashmius and elevate Gashmius into Ruchnius. And and that perspective is the run up to Elul, and the perspective through Elul, through Tishrei, as we've been. And we'll do much more of it as the time goes on. So l'cham.
Very good. Good. Thank you. Yeah, very good.
No, you want to give us a share?
Yeah, the shir, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol